Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Charlotte here, and today I'm going to be showing some stencil techniques for card makers. So a few different ways to use your stencils. First, I'm going to quickly show you the stencils I am using. These are the newest ones from Skull and Cross Buns. That first one is the Honeycomb Hexagon stencil. Then we have the Knit stencil, which also looks a bit like wheat. I think you could use it like that. We have the hundreds and thousands stencil, so sprinkles. Then we have the Leopard print stencil, and last but not least we have the Purl stencil. Purl is in knit and purl, but you could also use this in other ways, and the card I use it on, I actually use it as jelly beans, and you'll see that later in the video. So on with the techniques. First, I'm just going to show very basic ink blending through a stencil, which is the absolute most basic way you can use a stencil, I feel. So I have my stencil on my card base. I've actually already printed a Digi onto this card base and masked it off. And then I've placed the stencil over the top. I'm holding it in place with some repositional tape. You can use washi tape or post-it tape. And I just have it along one side because that lets me lift up the stencil like a hinge, so it will still stay in the same place, but I can see how much ink I've got down. For this particular ink blending, I'm using a stencil brush from scrapbook.com, and I'm blending on two different colours of Distress Oxide. I began with Squeezed Lemonade, which is a brighter yellow shade, and then Wild Honey, which I kept more constrained, so the colour will fade out. It will be darker where the bee is and gets lighter as it moves away from the bee, fading out to white. So it's quite clean and simple. I haven't covered the whole background. Here you can see how it looks when I remove the stencil and the mask. And I'll show you the finished cards at the end. Next, I'm using the Knit stencil, and this time I'm going to use Brushos. Brusho is a watercolour powder pigment similar to colour bursts. So again, I've tacked my stencil down with a hinge, this time over a piece of watercolour paper, and I'm sprinkling my Brusho over it. I used grey and black Brusho powders, and then I'm going to spritz liberally with water, and you can see the colour starting to burst out of it. I then have another piece of watercolour paper, and I'm going to turn the stencil over and press it onto the other piece of paper, and then just use my microfiber cloth to help me press that down. And this way you can actually get two impressions, so you get the negative and the positive. And I'll just try the first one with my heat gun whilst I let the other one sit for a moment. You may find that you can actually get more than one print from this, because there will still be some colour on the stencil after you lift it up from the second one, and you can always spritz it again with a bit more water and then you'll get lighter prints. The last time I did this technique, I think I got multiple prints just from one application of the colour. This time I decided just to take these two prints. So again, I'm going to dry the second one off with my heat tool, and I will set both of them aside and use one of them for a finished card later, and the other one will go into my stash for a future project. And being watercolour, this wipes up really easily and washes off the stencil very easily. The next technique I'm going to show is dry embossing with a stencil. So I have a panel of white card. I'm going to position the stencil over it and run it through my die cutting machine with an embossing mat. So you'll want your sandwich on an embossing setting for this, and it will push an impression into the card, as you can see here. I did decide I wanted to add some colour, so I positioned the stencil back into place and tacked it in place with some post-it tape or washi tape. If you're going to be doing this, then I would suggest not even taking the stencil off in the first place, but I wanted to show you how it looked once it's embossed. This time I'm using my round ink blending tools to add the colour. This is just a different way of adding colour. The ink blending tools I find give a richer colour, whereas with the stencil brushes it's much softer. If you'd be interested in a comparison of the ink blending tools, let me know in the comments below and I can see about doing that sometime in the future. I want to create a rainbow of colours on these sprinkles, and I'm going to use 4 colours for that because where they overlap with each other they will make the other colours. So I started with Festive berries for my red at the top, Then I have Squeezed Lemonade for the yellow, and where that crosses the Festive berries, of course, we get orange. I then used Lucky Clover for the green and Mermaid Lagoon for the blue. And here you can see how it looks once that's all ink blended. The next technique I'm going to show using the Leopard stencil is selective heat embossing. First, I'm going to do that actual ink blending through the stencil. I've masked off an area on the back of my card base. I'm again using the stencil brushes, and I'm just blending some brown ink through the stencil. This is caramel ink from Hero Arts. So as I said, this technique I'm going to be showing selective heat embossing through a stencil, but you can heat emboss the whole stencil design just by pressing your embossing ink into it, which can give a very pretty look. But for this technique, I thought I'd just show how to do that selectively. So first I'll quickly treat the area with my anti-static powder tool to make sure that the embossing powder is not going to stick where I don't want it to. I then have an embossing ink pen. I couldn't find a link to this particular one, but I do have a link to the Clearmark pen, which I got more recently, which I also like. So there's a link to that with the other products I have used in the description box below. And I'm going to use this pen just to draw on certain areas of the stenciling. So I'm not filling out the whole stencil design, just little bits here and there to give a more leopardy print look. Once I've got that all drawn, I'll remove the stencil and add my embossing powder. I'm using black embossing powder here. I did also remove my masks, and I'll just add the black embossing powder, and as you can see, it's sticking to just the places where I'd added the embossing ink with my pen. I'll tap off the excess, use a paintbrush to brush away any stray pieces of embossing powder, and then I will heat set this. And I did decide to put my masks back in place and just ink blend a little tea dye along the edges of this masked off area, because I felt like there wasn't enough definition between it and the background, and I wanted to make it very clear that this design was intentionally limited. So I'll just quickly ink blend that on, and that will finish the background for the card base. And again, if you stick around to the end of the video, you can see what I did to finish each of these cards. The final technique I'm going to show you with these stencils is using embossing paste. Again, I'm going to start by adding some colour. You don't have to do this. You can, if you have coloured embossing paste, or if you want to colour up your embossing paste, you could just do that directly and not add colour individually through the stencil. But as I wanted rows of different colours of these jelly beans as I am making them, I decided to add my colour on first. I thought that would be easiest. And this time, as you can see, I'm using another ink blending tool. This time I'm using finger daubers, which I thought would be easiest for getting into the small spaces and making my jelly beans or pearls. And I'm going to use 3 colours of Distress Oxides. I have Worn Lipstick, then I will also be using Wild Honey and Squeezed Lemonade, so pink, orange and yellow. And I'm just working in rows, alternating the colours. First I did the pink, then I will do the orange Wild Honey, and finally I will add the Squeezed Lemonade. And even though these sponge daubers are quite small, you may still find there are some places that your colours go over the lines of the stencil into the next one. So you might have some yellow on the edge of the pink jelly beans, but I don't think that matters too much. I kind of liked it myself. If you don't like that, then you could try masking off between the areas to make sure that each row is the colour you want it. So I then removed the stencil and cleaned the ink off because I don't want to get the ink into my embossing paste. This is actually a modelling paste that is clear. So once I put the stencil back in place, I'm going to use my spatula or palette knife to add the modelling paste over the stencil and just spread it out nice and thin. If you'd like to know the best way to store modelling paste or texture paste and have it keep well without going hard, then I did at the beginning of the year make a video specifically on that topic, and I'll link to that in the top right hand corner if you'd like to check that out. Of course, you do want to make sure you clean off your stencil, palette knife and craft mat very quickly after using embossing paste because you don't want to let it dry on there. Okay, so those are all my tips on how to use stencils on your cards. And here are the completed cards that I made with these techniques. Here's the first one, very clean and simple. As I said, I'd already put the Digi on there and masked it off. So all that was left to do was add some colouring. I just used my Spectral Noir Illustrator markers to colour that in. So that was very clean and simple one. For the knit stencil, I did use the negative, so the print of that Brusho background. I combined it with a knit embossing folder and a Merry Christmas sentiment from Skull and Cross Buns to create a monochromatic card. I went with a birthday card for my hundreds and thousands piece with the dry embossing. I combined it with a sentiment from some Heavy Doodle sets and a little image from Lawn Fawn, and I've edged that panel with some glitter peel-offs from Love from Lizzie. For the leopard print stencil, I ended up making a little leopard with Your Next Stamp's cute cat bookmark dies, and I added the pattern onto the leopard in the same way that I had added it to the card base. And I finished that off with a Simon Says stamp sentiment. And then for my little jelly beans, once they were completely dry, I popped them up onto a pink card base. And I have a grey sentiment banner with a Have a Sweet Day sentiment and a few Nouveau drops. So that completes all of the 5 cards that I made with the stencils and different stenciling techniques. I would love to hear from you in the comments below which of the cards is your favourite and also which technique is your favourite. I really enjoy all of the techniques actually. I think they all have their place and it's really fun to experiment with different ways of using stencils. If you enjoyed this video, you can press the like button to let me know, and if you didn't like it, then the dislike button is right next to it. Let me know if there's a particular tool or technique you'd like to learn about in future, and I can maybe do a video on that. If you'd like to find the products used, as I have mentioned, they're all in the description box down below. There's also a discount code for shopping at Skull and Cross Buns if you'd like to pick up any of these stencils. If you're not yet a subscriber, you can subscribe to my channel by pressing the logo showing on screen now, and there's a notification bell below that will let you know every time I post a new video to make sure you don't miss any. There are also a couple of other videos showing on screen if you'd like to see something more from me straight away. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!